Welcome. This is the Heart Sutra session. What I propose to do is to go through the text of the Heart Sutra and explain practically every word so that people can gain a working knowledge of what the text says. As to what it means, I'll do the best I can, and you'll have to do the best that you can in terms of understanding it because it's very deep. But every little bit helps, and repeating these ideas is also really helpful. This will be on tape, so you can use the video on the YouTube site to review it if you like. I start with an invocation. Om Namo Bhagavatyai Arya Prajna Paramitayai. That means homage to the perfection of wisdom, the noble one, the beautiful one. The perfection of wisdom is imaged as a goddess, as a deity, and there are very few images of her, partly because she's the emblem of emptiness. And being emptiness, she's elusive. We, however, are going to go chasing the wisdom goddess through the text of one of the better sutras. This 25-line sutra, the Heart Sutra, is a summary of the larger sutras, biggest one being 100,000 lines. And it was written after the larger sutras were all done. And there's some indication it was actually written in China and then back translated into Sanskrit. Nevertheless, I started with the Sanskrit, that being traditional. And I compared a number of different translations and the Sanskrit original and came to a conclusion about what the text says. It starts out, "Thus have I heard." And that's, in this case, a pious fiction. Thus have I heard of the words of Ananda, who was present at every assembly that the Buddha ever gave in the days of the original teaching. And so every sutra starts with, "Thus I have heard," and then describes the place. At one time, the Blessed One was dwelling at Vulture Peak Mountain. And Vulture Peak Mountain is a natural amphitheater in North India. A lot of the sutra sessions were held there, and all of the Perfect Wisdom Sutras were said to have been spoken on Vulture Peak Mountain. And then it describes the assembly. This is a trimmed-down version. If you get a longer sutra, the assembly that's there will go on for pages sometimes. But in this case, it's simple. It's a great gathering of monks, nuns, and bodhisattvas. And at the time that they were gathered, at that time, the Blessed One entered into the Samadhi on the enumeration of phenomena called appearance of the profound. Samadhi is a state of deep concentration. It's a numinous word in both Hindu and Buddhist circles. It refers to the basic root, samadhi, put it together. And so the idea is you're putting together your mind in a state of deep concentration. And then there are flowery names for innumerable kinds of concentration, which all boil down to the same thing, namely a deeply concentrated mind. So the Buddha's in this samadhi, and most samadhis have a name. The name of this one was Appearance of the Profound. And it's about the enumeration of phenomena. Phenomena is a word that can mean dharmas with a little d, the atoms of experience, if you will, the constituents of reality, which are microscopically tiny and invisible and extremely short in duration. The metaphor that I like to use for dharmas is that these dharmas, of which there are 75 or so different kinds, Each one is like an atom, and they cluster together in a moment, say a 10,000th of a second, a very fast moment. So this molecule of dharmas arises in each moment, lasts a little tiny while, and then decays back into emptiness. And this constant rise and fall of phenomena is what the Buddha is observing from a deep level of concentration. And it's called appearance of the profound because the dharmas and their array is a very profound subject, and rarely do the dharmas appear. We're not able to get the dharmas in view because of our lack of concentration. If you were to live in a cave for a year or two, you might be able to slow the mind down enough to actually get the dharmas in view. For us, that's near impossible. So what we get in view is the 5 skandhas, which I'll cover down the road here a bit. So I'll read the blurb. The Heart Sutra is the summary and distillation of the methods contained in all the larger Perfect Wisdom Sutras. It is one of the spiritual treasures of humankind. Taking the view emptiness is the primary method. Now, there's been a huge amount of ink spilled about the word emptiness, and none of it reaches the mark. Emptiness is not explicable in words. It basically means that nothing in this world that we perceive is unique unto itself. There's no standalone phenomena. Everything is interconnected with everything else. So you can't really find the boundaries. And since everything is interconnected with everything else, it has no essential nature. For 2 reasons. One, it's interconnected and dependent on all these other phenomena. And secondly, it's an illusion. The dharmas arise and fall in the emptiness, but the emptiness itself is not usually perceptible. The way to perceive it is to slow the mind way down, and then you'll notice there are gaps in the thoughts. And if you focus on those gaps, that's where the emptiness is. But you have to slow your mind down quite a bit before the gaps become visible. So this takes work. As I said, the primary method is taking the view. So you take the view, that chair that I supposedly see over there, that chair appears, but it's totally interconnected with everything else in the universe, basically. The metal came out of the earth. The metal was smelted and fashioned in a factory by workers. It was delivered to a store. The store sold it. We bought it, and so on like that. There's nowhere that you can find an actual firm boundary of anything. So the method is to take everything as empty. And the difficulty is there are some things we think are real. Most of us think time and space are real. And indeed, space is unconditioned. I'm not sure about time, whether it's unconditioned or not. Certainly, it doesn't exist in any real sense. You know, it's a notion that our minds have made up. So the method would be to find something that you think is real. Like maybe I think my family is real. And say, okay, no, the family is connected with all the ancestors. The family is connected with all the acquaintances and friends. So there's no standalone family. There's no such thing. There's only a cluster of phenomena. And that's the view that you take. And to the extent that it's possible to take that view, a lot of extra attachments and aversions and confusions are cleared up by taking the view emptiness. I'll go on. The perfection of wisdom is the method of the goddess Prajnaparamita that removes all cognitive impediments to enlightenment. every time we think something is other than it really is, that's an impediment to enlightenment. And unfortunately, we're filled with all these illusions about things. So there's a lot of impediments to remove. And you can be meticulous about it and go through these phenomena one by one, say, this is empty, that is empty, and so on. It's all a construct. It's all an illusion made up by our minds. If there's anything out there, like Immanuel Kant called it the Ding an sich, the actuality behind the perception, because our perceptual apparatus so conditioned what we perceive that we have no way of knowing what it actually is in itself, if it's anything. So we can take the view it's not anything in itself. And that's fairly plausible. At the same time, the noble Avalokiteshvara, the great being, was engaging in the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and clearly saw the 5 skandhas to be empty of any essential nature. Okay, we're going word by word here, more or less. Avalokiteshvara. That means he who looks down from above, the Lord who looks down from above. And that's a name for Chenrezig. The Chinese name for that being is Guan Yin. And the Japanese name is Kwanzeon, one of the premier Bodhisattvas of the Mahayana tradition, the large vehicle. As you know, Bodhisattva is a name for an enlightening being, a being that has pledged to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all beings, and is working towards that end, towards that goal of completely cognizing the reality in its ultimate sense. And again, the emphasis, Avalokita was engaging in the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom. In other words, he was actively dissolving everything he perceived or thought into emptiness, saying, this is just a construct. And as a construct, it has no intrinsic or permanent reality. It's all impermanent. Okay, he clearly saw the 5 skandhas to be empty of essential nature. That's the next step after the emptiness of the ego. That's not mentioned in this sutra because it's assumed that Shariputra, who is being addressed to understand the perfection of wisdom in greater detail, was an expert in what's called the Abhidharma, which is the higher Dharma, the analysis of the ideas of the Buddha Dharma. And so in the old school, he was the wisest of Shakyamuni's disciples. But in the new dispensation, the direct pupils of the Buddha were unaware of the emptiness of phenomena. They were taught the emptiness of the self. And the idea is the self is an illusion. It's something that we impute, something that we project on these 5 skandhas, which are a process that goes on in the mind. Skandha means heap. And a skandha is actually nothing more than a category or a heap of these dharmas. So these phenomena that come and go in a 10,000th of a second or less, they're heaped up in skandhas so that they're easier to cognize. So the skandhas form all material form. So matter in all its forms, gaseous, solid, liquid, and vapor. Also, the body and all the sense organs are rupa, are matter, are form. Feeling is just exactly that reaction that you have to a sense perception. And I know this stuff is a little bit scholastic, but it's you find it everywhere, so it's necessary to contemplate it a little bit. You should know the names of the 5 skandhas and some idea of what they refer to, which can only be done through repetition. So the form skandha is one of the 5. The feeling skandha is a positive, negative, or neutral reaction to a sense impression. You either like it, you don't like it, or you don't care. And on that is built the entire emotional and thinking structure of the mind. And that's called perception, recognition, samjna. So the feeling is just that raw reaction, that first reaction to any sense impression. You know, I look at the rain outside, and right now I'm indifferent to it because I'm inside and I don't care that it's raining or not. And so on like that. So after the form and the feeling, there's the perception, at least it's called perception. The Sanskrit word is samjna, which means knowing altogether. That jna word will keep coming up. Prajna, that which goes towards the ultimate gnosis, the omniscience. Samjna is what the knowing puts together. In other words, the perception. So it goes from the sense contact all the way up to the recognition and naming of an object. Again, when I see that chair, I perceive it, and I recognize it as the object that it is, the name for it. And then I can examine my feeling tone about it, and it's pretty neutral. You know, it's just an object. If I see a rose, I'm going to have a positive view of it, probably. So you have form, feeling, perception, impulses, or karmic formations, or volitions, and consciousness are the 5 skandhas. So the 4th skandha is the complicated one. There are 51 different kinds of dharmas in the 4th skandha. And it's basically 11 virtuous dharmas, 6 cardinal non-virtuous dharmas, greed, hate, confusion, pride, envy and jealousy, and so on like that. And then there are 22 subsidiary non-virtuous states of mind that can arise in any moment. And then there's some other miscellaneous as a catch-all category. So the 4th skandha is called samskara, which means, again, putting it together. So it's what assembles the motivation, what causes the impulse to action. So it's the psychological cause and effect apparatus of the human psyche. And then that last skandha, the vijnana, there's that jna word again. In this case, it means discriminating consciousness. So the consciousness skandha is the logical mind, the mind that separates into yes and no, black and white, good and evil, all these opposites. Now, there is a state of mind that's beyond those opposites, but it's doesn't appear within the skandhas. The skandhas are the ordinary apparatus that we have a moment-by-moment experience of. Okay, that was the hard part. I should mention a little bit about Shariputra. You know, Guanyin, you know, everybody's heard of Guanyin. The Avalokiteshvara means, as I said, the Lord who looks down from on high. Oddly enough, he who looks down from on high, when that idea, that mythology went to China, it became she who hears the sound of the world. So the whole figure morphed. And one of the reasons it morphed was that in Tibet there's a goddess Tara, who represents the action of compassion. And as the action of compassion, she is the tears of Chenrezig when he got frustrated trying to straighten the Tibetans out, and they were such a gnarly people that it was difficult to do. So he broke down in tears. It said that his body, his brain broke into 11 pieces, And the Buddha had to fashion a head out of each of those 11 pieces, and he became the 1,000-armed Chenrezig that rescues and saves all sentient beings. In this sutra, even though he's the Bodhisattva of compassion and a reflection of Amitabha, the great Buddha of the Pure Land, in this sutra, he's the emblem of wisdom. He's teaching Shariputra the essentials of the perfect wisdom. Now, Shariputra, interesting fellow, it means son of Shari. Shari was the most intelligent woman in India at the time. And Shariputra was her son, of course. He had a good buddy that he grew up with, whose name in Buddhism is Mahamoggalyayana. And they decided to go looking for a teacher, and they found one and studied with him for a while. That wasn't working out, so they left, and they decided to split up and look for the real teacher of theirs. And Shariputra ran into a monk and asked him, "Are you a teacher or a pupil?" And he said, "I'm a pupil." And he said, "Well, who are your pupil of?" "Oh, Shakyamuni Buddha." "Oh, what does he teach?" And he said, "Well, I'm just beginning, so I can't really designate it very thoroughly." But he said a phrase that caused Shariputra to achieve an enlightened state. Ye dharma hetu prabhava hetun teshan tatagato hyavadat teshan chayo niroda evam vadima shramana swaha, which briefly means of all the dharmas, of all the phenomena that arise, the Tathagata, the Buddha, has expounded their cause. And of the cessation of all those dharmas, likewise, he has spoken it. And that was enough for Shariputra. This is the guy we want. So he went back to Mahamoggalyayana and said, "Come on, I found him." And they immediately joined the Sangha, and they became the foremost pupils of Shakyamuni Buddha. So that's Shariputra. I should mention, one of the ways to think of the total interdependence, the emptiness of all phenomena, is that they all have interbeing. That's Thich Nhat Hanh's phrase, but it really fits nicely. So there is nothing but interbeing. There's no standalone being. There's no standalone anything. It's all one thing. It's all interbeing. And the concepts become more subtle. Okay, we'll go on with the sutra. Here, O Shariputra, all dharmas are marked with emptiness. They have no characteristics. There is no arising and no cessation. There is no purity and no impurity. There is no decrease and no increase. So again, all dharmas, you can say all phenomena, since we're not perceiving the dharmas in this day and age, the age of the decay of the good dharma. So all phenomena are empty. This business of marked with emptiness, in the Abhidharma system, each dharma has a unique characteristic. Like fire is known by its heat, and water is known by its wetness, and so on like that. Every dharma has one specific characteristic that marks it aside from all the other dharmas. And so this statement is, no, all dharmas have no characteristics. Because coming out of the emptiness, out of the suchness, out of the entirety, it has no separate self-entity. Again, Thich Nhat Hanh's felicitous phrase. They simply do not exist of their own selves. Even though we think of ourselves as existing and separate, that's an illusion of the mind. And that's what creates the ego, and the ego is what gets us in so much trouble in samsara. So we want to basically perceive the ego as a constructed phenomenon that's useful for survival, but not anything we want to take seriously at all, because it's just a phenomenon. There is no arising and no cessation. Again, to use this metaphor, and I hope it's right, this molecule of experience made up of these dharmas arises in a moment. There's arising, there's duration, there's cessation. And this works on every level. On the level of dharmas, a perception, I had a sight of that house over there, arises in the mind. It lasts for a little bit, and then the mind moves on to something else. So this constant rise and fall, arising and cessation, and the statement here is none of that exists really. That too is illusion. Nothing arises, nothing ceases. And likewise, purity and impurity. We have a definite idea of what's pure and what's impure. But in emptiness, there's no distinction. And as to increase and decrease, there's a technical wiggle here. Dharmas are considered to come in two categories, deficient and complete. A deficient dharma is a dharma in samsara that rises and falls with the time. A complete dharma is like empty space or nirvana, which is permanent, doesn't change. But if it doesn't change, that means it's not born into this world, because everything that's born into this world changes. It decays and rots away and dies. That's what things in this world do. So empty space is not born and does not die. And likewise, nirvana is not born and does not die. And our essential nature, such as it might be, is not born and does not die. Those three attributes are a key factor in the Abhidharma analysis of things. So basically what this sutra is doing is taking the essential basic concepts of the Abhidharma and negating them and saying, hey, wait a minute, this is just a construct. It was made up by the mind. Now, Buddha's mind was very deep and brilliant, so the stuff he made up was a good construct. But we have to remember it still is a construct. And this idea of the dharmas arising in a moment and ceasing, that too is a concept. What it actually is unspeakable. We can't put in words or concepts what it actually is. More of the sutra. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no appearance, no form, no feeling, no perception, no karmic formation, no consciousness. And here you can see the dialectics of emptiness, as Kanzi called it. Can see it marked out. It starts out with the self being empty, and then you raise to the next level, the process, the skandhas that we mistake for a self. Those too are empty. In fact, the dharma that make up the skandhas, those are empty. They have no characteristic. And now it's turned all around and said, okay, in emptiness, there's no such thing as form. In emptiness, there's no form. We were just saying back there that emptiness was identical with form, and form was identical with emptiness. And then they turn it around in a burst of illogic, which the Prajnaparamita is known for. It's exuberant illogic. If you take the Madhyamaka route, Nagarjuna's work on Madhyamaka covers the same ground but with dry logical statements. And Nagarjuna goes through 26 different kinds of things that you might think would exist and proves that they don't. But it's very scholastic, and the Prajnaparamita, in comparison, is exuberant. She keeps blowing minds by negating all kinds of things that we think might be real, and arrives at wisdom that way, rather than plodding through the logic, which gets you maybe faster there. I don't know. I'm still plodding. So these skandhas don't exist in emptiness. And furthermore, none of the sense organs or sense objects exist in emptiness. And Then this business no I element up to no mind element, and so on up to no mind consciousness element. That refers to what are called the 18 dhatus. Dhatu is a realm or a world or an element. And these 18 things are just the 6 sense objects. You count thoughts as the object of vijnana. The discriminating consciousness has an object of a thought. It's as if the thoughts are not ours, they just flow through. And the mind cognizes them. It's a curious idea, but that seems to be what's indicated. So these 6 organs and 6 objects, and then the 6 consciousnesses that arise from an object. There's a sense perception, and that generates a consciousness. So you have sight consciousness, smell consciousness, hearing consciousness, and then thought consciousness. So those are the 18 dhatus, and that's what's indicated here. Up to is a very curious phrase in the Prajnaparamita literature, because it usually refers to a list you're unfamiliar with, and digging out what those things are. If you saw that and didn't know about the 18 dhatus, it would be a puzzle. And one of the things I'm trying to do here is solve all those textual puzzles, so then you can easier contemplate the meaning of emptiness, which is what it's actually about. But it helps to have an anchor in the text. Let's see, speaking of anchoring in the text, the next bit. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, up to no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. There is no suffering, no cause of suffering, no cessation of suffering, and no path. No wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Okay, here, the basic doctrines of Buddhism are negated. Again, the reminder is, well, the Buddha Dharma is magnificent, it's splendid, it's very deep, it brings us enlightenment and wisdom, but it's a construct. It's something made up by Shakyamuni Buddha's mind. And so he's saying in this emptiness, in this all, as it were, or the nothing at all, it's the same difference. In Gnostic Christianity, it's called the pleroma, the fullness. And the emptiness is so elusive that you could call it the fullness with equal accuracy. So the fullness has no ignorance or extinction of ignorance in it. It's just the fullness. There's no differentiation in it at all. But here, these useful doctrines of the Buddha are declared to be empty. And that's useful if you get attached to the Buddha Dharma. Go around thinking these 5 skandhas are real, and I can explain everything with the 5 skandhas, and the sense contacts and the 18 dhatus. I don't need any further explanation about anything. That kind of attitude has to be destroyed if you're to make any progress in wisdom or enlightenment. So that's what we do. We negate everything that we have perceived in terms of thinking that it's real, thinking that it's permanent, that it's going to last. Because the fact is, everything is impermanent, nothing lasts, at least nothing in our experience. There could be things beyond our experience, but what this is talking about is our experience as ordinary human beings or as travelers on the path. And in that case, none of these dharmas are real. I guess I've got time. This next concept is pretty deep. It's what Shakyamuni Buddha arrived at in the 3rd watch of the night, just before his enlightenment. And the insight was into the mechanism of cause and effect. The 4 holy truths, 4 noble truths, indicated that our experienced life is suffering, that there's a cause to suffering, namely action in the past. In other words, our own minds have created this mess. You know, it wasn't anybody else that did it to us. It was ourselves that created this, and ourselves that can uncreate it, can deconstruct this mistaken mind that we've generated over our lifetime. So, in the third watch of the night, the Buddha perceived the intricacies of cause and effect and proceeded to formulate those in a list of 12 links of dependent arising. And this was the primary insight of the Buddha at his enlightenment. But it's a very complex dharma, or set of dharmas. It works on every level. I'll try to summarize it, though ideally that would be the topic of an entire talk, which it has been in innumerable times over the years. Let's see, to summarize it. Ignorance is the cause of all phenomena. And this word ignorance, the Sanskrit for it is avidya, which means not seeing. So the idea is it's what we're totally unaware of. You know, the fundamental darkness in our psyche, that which is totally invisible to us, and yet generates all these negative emotions, of which the primary three are greed, hate, and delusion. And it's said that most of our mental states involve one or the other or several of these, greed, hate, and delusion. Then those three poisons generate the five poisons, greed, hate, and delusion, along with pride and envy, or arrogance and jealousy. So those five poisons then pervade the mind, and all kinds of subsidiary poisons arise. So the effort is to get rid of greed, hate, and confusion, and eventually to get rid of the fundamental ignorance itself. And that would entail perfect Buddhahood, to get rid of the avidya. But we have to start where we are, and we start where our experience is. And if I experience a moment of greed, I at least notice, oh, I'm being greedy. Now maybe I restrain myself and don't go after whatever I was greedy for. Or maybe I do, you know, I'll have that ice cream cone after all. But at least I'm noticing where my mind is at. And then the next moment I'm irritated at something, and I may feel like lashing out. Maybe if I'm practicing, I don't lash out, I restrain myself. But the emotion is still there, and I acknowledge that emotion. One of the things you can do, especially if you meditate, mindful meditation, off the cushion even, you take the thought or emotion that has arisen, and rather, say it's a negative one, rather than pushing it away, you simply hold it in place and examine it deeply. And what happens is it's going to dissolve of its own accord. But you have to have a mindful gap to do that. And, you know, the reason for a daily meditation practice, if you can possibly generate one, is exactly that creates a platform for you to be mindful during the day. So it increases the mindfulness that you have during the day. Everybody has some. You know, we hear a noise and we look, that's a mindful moment. You know, we're concentrated and awake at that moment, or alert at least. If not fully awake, we're at least alert. And it goes that way through the day. But occasionally we can hold a thought or a feeling in place and examine it. And we're not our thoughts, we're not our feelings. They're just something that happens. So not to identify with them either. Anyway, that's the practice of perfection of wisdom. Everything is empty. Okay, so you have ignorance, and that generates the poisons, the non-virtuous states of mind, the negative emotions. And the second of the 12 links is karmic formation, that is samskaras. That's exactly the mental forms that are caused from past karma. So you have the ignorance as the basic dynamo, and the samskaras, the karmic formations, as the side effect of that ignorance, creating the negative emotions. And then that creates the consciousness of whatever, that moment of consciousness corresponding to whatever that emotion or thought is. Then that goes to name and form, which are really the 5 skandhas. That goes to the 6 sense bases, in other words, the sense organs. And that goes to sense contact, where the sense connects with an object, and from that feeling arises, and all that is automatic. Once you have the ignorance and the karmic formations, then consciousness, name and form, and 6 senses, and sense contact, and feeling reaction are all automatic. But when you get to the feeling, that's when you can intervene. That's the weak link in the chain, is just after feeling, because from feeling arises craving. You either want to pull it to you or push it away from you, depending on the perception of the moment or the state of mind at the moment. So between the feeling and the desire or the hatred that arises at that moment, you can deal with that, you can work on that. And then the next link is called upadana, which means grasping it. So in the case of a thought of craving, then the act of grasping for whatever the object of craving is completes the cycle. Once that's done, then it goes to bhava, the becoming, and the seed, the karmic seed, is planted, which will ripen in the future as birth, old age, decay, and death. So when you're working with the 12 links, you want to break the chain whenever possible, and these things happen moment by moment by moment. A new set of conditions arises. But by not reacting to a feeling, you become free in that moment of that karmic chain of events. And the practice consists of having more and more free moments, to put it that way. I hope that's right. Okay, that's the 12 links of conditioned co-production of dependent arising. And then if you can get rid of the ignorance, then the samskaras don't exist. Then the consciousness, negative consciousness, does not arise. The sense contact does not arise, and so on. So you've dissolved all 12 of those by dissolving the ignorance. But the fly in the ointment is ignorance is really hard to get rid of, because we don't perceive it. We're not aware of it. How do you erase something you're not aware of? So we deal with the samskaras, the side effect, the negative emotions. And I should mention, if you want to practice this, don't pick a rage or a flaming desire. Pick a small moment, one where it's just a little bit of irritation or a little bit of attraction to an object, because those are easier to deal with, the low energy stuff. If you're in a rage, then you spend all your time controlling that emotion. There's no time to really observe it. But a small irritation, you can pretty much watch what it is. And then later you can work on the big stuff. But for me, that's a principle. Again, I am not certain that it's right, but it works for me, namely to start out with the small stuff. What needs working on, of course, is the big stuff. But when we want to become familiar with the tools, then we can use the small stuff. Okay, there's also no suffering, no cause of suffering, no cessation of suffering, and no path. Now that's the other premier insight that Shakyamuni Buddha had during his enlightenment, that samsara is suffering, it's unsatisfactory. You can't get any satisfaction ultimately, because there's always something unsatisfactory no matter what the situation is. It could be totally cushy, a really good thing, and still there's that background niggling unsatisfactoriness of being in a body and living in this world. So samsara is suffering. The cause of suffering, again, is negative action in the past. And the principle is, if you can restrain your body by not killing, not stealing, and not committing sexual misconduct, which can be defined in different ways for different people. And then you work on the speech, no lying, no harsh speech, no slander and backbiting, no idle chatter. And once you've restrained your speech, then the hard one, working on the mind. And you want to avoid all covetous thoughts, all malicious thoughts, and all mistaken views. And that takes a lot of work, but we start with restraining our bodies. So we do impeccable action in the physical, and then work on the speech, or work on the body and speech simultaneously. But eventually we become responsible for all of our thinking. You know, because the thought comes in from outside, basically. And so whether you accept that thought or not is up to you. You know, people identify with their thoughts, and if it's my thought, you know, then there it is. But if it's just a thought coming through, I can choose whether to identify with it or not. And if I choose not to identify with it, then it doesn't cause a negative reaction, does not plant a negative karmic seed. And the wrinkle there is, okay, say we achieve arhatship, or even the full enlightenment of a Buddha. All those karmic seeds from the past are going to continue to sprout. So arhats have pretty interesting lives, because all of their karmic seeds are in the process of being either destroyed or sprouting and lived through. But eventually, all those past karmic seeds are cleared up, and since an arhat is not making any present or future karmic seeds, then they're released from the samsara. That's the idea. So anyway, these Four Noble Truths, the suffering, the cause of suffering, the fact that there's a way out, that there is a cessation of suffering. You can seek a surcease of sorrow, as they would say. So the suffering ceases, and there's a way, a path to the cessation of suffering, and that's the Noble Eightfold Path. And then it's Mahayana spin-offs, doing the six perfections, working on the perfection of wisdom, working on the mind-only philosophies, plenty to do in that regard. Okay, no cessation of suffering and no path. There's no wisdom. Okay, by now, those seekers after wisdom are reading the Wisdom Sutras. They might think wisdom is a real thing. They might think wisdom is a solidly existing thing. Well, sorry, but it's not. So there's no wisdom in emptiness either. And there's no attainment. No matter how much samadhi you attain, it's no attainment in emptiness. And likewise, there's no non-attainment. Didn't achieve samadhi that time. That non-attainment doesn't exist in emptiness. And then it goes on, because the Bodhisattvas have no attainment, they rely on the perfection of wisdom. The perfection of wisdom is the mother of all the Buddhas. So if you're in a devotional space, again, Om Namo Bhagavatyai Arya Prajnaparamitaye, homage to the perfection of wisdom, the lovely, the holy. And since she's the mother of all Buddhas, she creates enlightenment through the complete understanding of how everything is empty. You know, to what's actually meant by that in terms of realizing emptiness. The amount of ink that's been spilled over shunyata, over emptiness, is immense. And none of it actually designates the emptiness fully. That's not possible. It's all just concepts. The idea, apparently, at least that's the scholastic excuse for working on all these subtle ideas, that the subtler your concept of emptiness gets, the thinner it is, and it's easier to leap into emptiness from a subtle position. So having a subtle concept of emptiness is useful, but it has to be understood that a subtle concept is not the same as a realization. And so ultimately we're wishing to realize emptiness. But we start out with a conceptual idea of emptiness. We make that subtler and subtler, and then later there's a leap into what's called the path of seeing, which is the seeing of the entire path of the Dharma laid out before us. It's like we've seen it all. And then there's a long stage of cultivation or meditation or familiarization where you take that insight and develop it and repeat it and make it permanent, as it were, to the extent that anything in a living world can be permanent. Okay, Bodhisattvas have no attainment. They rely on the perfection of wisdom as their mother. And there is no obscuration of mind. The obscurations come in two flavors. The kleshas, the emotional obstructions, which are basically greed, hate, and confusion, and all the side effects, the small negative moments that stem from those. That doesn't exist for a bodhisattva. The kleshas have been completely eliminated. And then once the kleshas are eliminated, or at least attenuated, then you have the cognitive obscurations. And that's what the perfect wisdom really addresses, is the cognitive obscurations. It's our wrong thinking, it's our twisted minds that get us in so much trouble in the world. So we want to undo the wrong thinking. And that's the method of seeing everything as empty. You take the view of emptiness. So there's no obscuration of mind for those bodhisattvas who rely on the perfection of wisdom, and therefore there's no fear. What's to be afraid of? There's nothing that has any lasting reality, including our bodies. We're going to die. So we might as well incorporate that understanding in the rest of our understanding so that we can live fully. Living with death as a reality in the future. It changes our attitude a little bit, but the idea is to live more fully in each moment. And contemplating death is a good idea in that it helps us live in every moment, live well in every moment. Okay, there's no obscuration of mind, there's no fear. Then they transcend all wrong views and attain complete nirvana, passing beyond the bounds of sorrow. Now there's a thing with sutras and Buddhist teachings. There's a precise technical way to look at a given teaching, and there's the let's be a little slushier and more useful about it. So when they say all phenomena are empty, if you take it technical, that's down to the dharmas which we don't perceive. But if you say all phenomena, well, the phenomenon of that car that just passed, that's empty of essential nature, but it's a phenomenon that we can perceive. So loosely then, phenomena is all the happenings that we can perceive. Technically, phenomena are these 75 kinds of dharmas. Okay, likewise, transcend all error. In other words, all mistaken views are transcended. Great. That's the obvious meaning of it. There's also a technical meaning. There are 4 things, the Chinese call them upside down views. These are the root wrong views. And there's 4 of them. One is that you seek for permanence in a world that has only impermanence in it. You seek for permanence where permanence doesn't exist. You seek for happiness where happiness doesn't exist in the true sense because of this background suffering that we all have. Just being in a body is a kind of suffering. Then we look for what is constant. Oh, I said that one. We look for what is pure in things that are impure, like everything in the world. And then you look for a self in what has no self. In other words, all these phenomena, all our experience, there's no real self in it. It's just stuff that happens. And taking that view, then we have a lot less trouble in our lives, a lot more calm. So it's worth doing, worth working on. Anyway, transcend all errors, and also transcend those 4 upside-down views. And attain complete nirvana. That's the nirvana without residue. That's after all the karmic seeds are used up. That's complete nirvana. Otherwise, it's nirvana with residue. You still have karmic seeds to deal with. And passing beyond the bounds of sorrow. Now, oddly enough, that phrase exists in the Chinese, not, I think, in the Sanskrit, and it was placed in 2 different places. Way at the beginning of the sutra, Avalokiteshvara is moving in the course of the emptiness which has gone beyond. At that point, they add passing beyond the bounds of sorrow to indicate that all this abstruse stuff has a purpose. The purpose is to pass beyond the bounds of sorrow. And then it also makes sense in this place, attain complete nirvana, passing beyond the bounds of sorrow. Let's see what I wrote. When the mind is not obscured, no fear can exist. There are 2 kinds of obscuration. The coarse obscuration of the afflictions, the negative emotions, the clashes, and the more subtle cognitive obscurations, wrong views. Error refers to the 4 upside-down views, the overthrowers of inner calm, all attempts to find in samsara permanence in what is intrinsically impermanent, to find happiness in what is intrinsically suffering, to find beauty in what is intrinsically repulsive, to find selfhood where there is no self. So that's what happens when the Bodhisattvas rely totally on the perfection of wisdom, that all of these cognitive obscurations are dealt with and cease to be a problem. Okay, all the Buddhas of the 3 times, by means of perfect wisdom, have fully awakened to the utmost true and complete enlightenment. That's the next phase after the Bodhisattvas clearing their afflictions and cognitive obscurations. They become Buddhas. 3 times they're just past, present, and future. And it's perfect wisdom that allows them to awaken to complete enlightenment, utmost true and complete enlightenment. The phrase is anuttara samyak sambodhi. And my teacher, Dr. Kanzi, who taught me the details of the perfection of wisdom, called that utmost right and perfect enlightenment. Kanzi was a stickler for literal translations. And anuttara means utmost. It means unsurpassed. Samyak means righteous or orthodox. Sam is an emphasis syllable, and bodhi means awakening. Buddha, the awakened one. Bodhi, the awakening. So utmost right and perfect enlightenment. This is the realm of nirvana which leaves nothing behind. Okay, we had a complete teaching there, and now a bonus. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom is a great mantra, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering. It is true because it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is said in this way. Om gate, gate, paragate, parasam gate, bodhi svaha. It's unusual for a Mahayana sutra to have a mantra. There are a number of perfect wisdom sutras that are tantric that have mantras. But this sutra doesn't have a visualization. It doesn't have any tantric features other than the mantra. So go figure. It's a catch-all hybrid, as it were. So the statement is, the mantra is great, greatly knowledgeable, unsurpassed, equal to the unequaled, thoroughly pacifies all suffering. That's pretty good. You have to chant a lot of those to thoroughly pacify all suffering, but anything is possible. And it is true because it is not false. There's your classical medieval logic. You know, it either is or it isn't, no middle ground, no excluded middle. Okay, it's true because it's not false. And then it goes gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. Gone, gate, gone, gate, paragate, gone beyond, parasamgate, gone totally beyond, bodhi, awakening, svaha, so be it. There is hidden in there a key doctrine of not only early Buddhism but the Mahayana as well. It's called the doctrine of the 5 paths. I'll just read the blurb. This mantra rhythms enlightenment and is also a reminder of the 5 paths of a Mahayana Bodhisattva. Thus, the first gate refers to the path of accumulation, where one practices Dharma to gather up enough merit and wisdom to embark on the journey of enlightenment. The second gate is for the path of linking, the path of intense practice, the yogic path. Paragate reminds us of the path of seeing, where the first full realization of emptiness takes place. That's where you see the entire path. So at that point, you're awake and totally clear. And then the afflictions take over and you can slide back into asleepness, which is why the parasamgate, the long stage of the path of cultivation, where we take that moment of awakening and amplify it. And the path of cultivation goes through 9 bhumis, 9 stages of bodhisattvas, and arrives at the path corresponding to bodhi, awakening, called the path of no more learning. So at that point, the bodhisattva is a full Buddha. Okay, that is the gist of the Heart Sutra. They tacked on, actually the original one started with Avalokiteshvara coursing in emptiness, moving in the course of emptiness, and does not have the initial verbiage of thus have I heard and the assembly and all that stuff. That was added later to make it more like a proper sutra. Mm-hmm. The original sutra cut to the chase and went right to the first doctrine of coursing in emptiness, of navigating in emptiness. And likewise, they tacked on an ending. The original sutra, the short form, ends with Parasamgate Bodhisvaha, and then Iti Prajnaparamitam Samaptam. That's the colophon that says this is the full Heart Sutra. But this longer version adds the mandatory dramatic stage of the sutra. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and commended noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being. Well done, O son of good lineage, thus it is. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have taught, and all the Tathagatas will rejoice. And then the last bit, after the Blessed One thus spoke, Venerable Shariputra, noble Avalokiteshvara, and the world with his gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One. Here the Buddha approves this teaching on emptiness and enjoins people to practice the method, Prajnaparamita. The whole world rejoices, even the asuras, the contentious demigods, and the Gandharvas, the subtle beings who feed only on incense vapors and make wonderful music. The Heart Sutra is the definitive exposition of emptiness. It is widely chanted in many languages, both Asian and Western. Along with the Diamond Sutra, it is considered to be the entrance to the vast literature of the Perfect Enough said, I think that was a as thorough as I could be. A little bit tedious, maybe. I apologize for that, but this is difficult stuff, and if you're not tedious, you don't get through the obstacles. So, tedium will have to do.